Greetings, it's Gordon Causey, as always, coming live and unscripted once again. I'm going to be talking about a new topic tonight, and here's my dog. If you're new to this channel, Candy always shows up at the beginning because she expects to get a TREAT, and she even knows, I think she knows what that spells. So she's now doing her sit, and she'll give me her paw, lay down, and speak. She gets a bacon treat tonight. Sit. And that gets Candy out of the way. I see I already have a thumbs up. Someone likes Candy. Anyway, as always, before I get going, likes and subscriptions. Appreciate the thumbs up. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to be talking tonight about Donald Trump. He's always in the news, Donald. And with respect to the states of Colorado and now Maine, which have moved to have Trump's name removed from the ballot in the upcoming primaries, which is where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party nominate their candidates for president. And spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you right now, I think it's a crock. I think it's horseshit. Seems to use that word twice now in my last video and this one. I think it is horseshit, removing or attempting to have Trump's name removed. It's being widely reported that this is going to be challenged to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as I understand it, in the state of Colorado, it was actually that state's Supreme Court in a 4-3 ruling, which determined that Trump is ineligible to have his name on the Republican primary ballot because of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits an individual who has engaged in either sedition or engaged in insurrection. Sedition is to try and break away from the United States, to secede, and insurrection is where you try to overthrow the government. And this all stems around that January 6, 2021 incident in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C., where there was a large protest. Trump gave a speech, and then a bunch of people stormed the Capitol, and then some were able to gain entry. There's video evidence showing the supposed insurrectionists being escorted around. That was not an insurrection. That was a protest. Were there individuals involved in that who genuinely thought they were going to overthrow the U.S. government? Yeah, there were some individuals who misconstrued, who had their own agenda, who read into what Trump said at his speech and took it in a crazy divergent direction and actually thought they were just going to somehow overthrow. There was never a threat of the U.S. government being overthrown. And Trump did not, to my hearing, nothing in his speech was inciting the protesters into engaging in an insurrection. And even if there was some credibility to these allegations, that is all they are at this juncture, allegations. Trump has not been convicted of a crime. And this, I think, is incredibly important because a simple accusation is not proof. We heard in the wake of the 2016 election, where Trump was elected over Hillary Clinton, that there was Russian involvement. There were allegations of Russian collusion with the Trump campaign to circumvent American democracy. And those allegations basically petered into nothing. The evidence just was not there. Well, I mean, this world that we're living in is so upside down, backwards crazy right now, that it's heads you win, tails you lose. I have said many times on this channel that the mainstream news media, that their job often, especially around contentious issues, is all too often they want to tell you what to think, what to believe, and even how to feel. And the way you're supposed to feel about Donald Trump is that his allegations of voter fraud, of electoral interference, of irregularities during the 2020 election, that these are baseless and unfounded. On the morning after that election, I forget what date that election was, November 2020, I watched the election results, and I saw late in the evening, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, Trump leading in pretty much every key, what they define as the key battleground states. I'm talking about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, I think Wisconsin was one, Florida. These are the so-called battleground states, bellwether states. If you win Ohio, you're almost guaranteed to win the U.S. presidency. But Pennsylvania figures prominently, so does Indiana. And Trump was leading in all these key battleground states by 200,000, 300,000, sometimes 500,000 votes. And so I went to bed going, holy cow, it looks like he's going to win. Canadian, no skin in the game, so to speak. However, regardless of whether you're an American or not, who's sitting in the White House does have bearing on just about everyone in the world, and certainly everyone in the Western developed world. Canada and the United States is Canada's single largest trading partner. So it has ramifications here in Canada as well. And I was like, okay, Trump won. And then you wake up in the morning and you find out that in all these key battleground states, that just or enough mail-in ballots came in to flip them from Trump to Biden. And in most U.S. states, I mean, I don't know how much people know about the electoral system in the United States, but they have this electoral college that meets every 4 years. And each state is allocated a certain number of electoral college votes, and typically there are some outliers, but overwhelmingly in the 50 states, it's winner take all. So if a state has 14 electoral votes in the electoral college, the candidate who wins that state gets all 14. Even if you win by 10 votes, you get all 14. And that's how Trump was able to win the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton, despite losing the popular vote. In this case, in 2020, I think he won the popular vote and the electoral college vote. And I think there was fraud. Can I prove it? Nope, can't prove it. Does that mean it didn't happen? Does absence of evidence mean evidence of absence? It's a scientific principle right there. Just because you haven't found the evidence doesn't mean that your assertion is necessarily false. The simple fact of the matter is Donald Trump, just spitballing off memory, Donald Trump got 75 million votes in that 2020 election, which was more votes than any presidential candidate had ever received to that point. And every president running for re-election in the United States for their entire 200 and how many years is it? 250 years, coming up toward 250 years of history. In every presidential election where a candidate was running for re-election, if he increased his vote total from the first term and got more votes than he got the first time, every time that president has won re-election until 2020. And the other thing was the fact that voter turnout in 2020 was the highest. I think the number was 66% of registered voters in the United States voted in that election, which is a huge, massive increase over any previous election. You had to go back to 1900 to find an election where a larger percentage of registered voters voted in an election. And I can't prove it, but what I think happened is I think there were operatives within the DNC and with some high-ranking election officials who basically, how many votes do we need for Biden? What's the lead? 250,000? Okay, print up 260,000 Biden votes and throw in a couple thousand Trump votes just to, so it doesn't look too shady. So it's not 100%. And I did not buy for a second that Donald Trump lost that election. However, with that being said, the Republicans cheat too. I just think it's a case where the Democrats cheated better. The stakes, when it comes to sitting in the White House, the stakes are so high. And I think there's a Machiavellian bent to both sides. They view, when you get into the partisan politics, partisanship, and people are so convinced that the opposing candidate winning will be such a disaster that whatever you have to do is justified. We can go back to Watergate, which happened in the 1972 election. Richard Nixon against George McGovern. I was 6 years old and living in New Jersey at the time. And I come from a very political family. We were Canadians living in the United States. We had lived in Staten Island, New York, and then in Bergen County, New Jersey. My dad was working in New York City. And what had happened is as I, just going off memory, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, had its headquarters, kind of its war room in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., and Republican operatives broke into their headquarters, their war room, and basically were able to gather all types of intelligence on what the Democrats were planning to do and how they were going to manage the McGovern campaign. And an election is war. And there's an old, in warfare, I've probably mentioned before in these videos, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, treatise on how to conduct war, written by a Chinese general. I think it was 2,500 years ago or something like that. And one of the key takeaways from that is know your enemy. So in that 1972 election, by breaking into the Democratic National Committee's, their campaign headquarters, their war room, they were able to ascertain exactly what the McGovern campaign was planning to do. I don't know if it would have included things like stances on things. At that time, 1972, relations with China were important. But imagine if you're Richard Nixon and his team, and you now know how George McGovern is going to answer questions regarding how the United States should engage with China. Then when the two are on a televised debate and Richard Nixon is asked, what is your position on how the United States should engage, on how we should engage with China? Richard Nixon could say, well, you know, my opponent here is probably going to say something stupid and ridiculous like, and then he could lay out, having planned it out ahead of time, he could have laid out what McGovern's plan was, made into a straw man to make it look really stupid and weak, and then he could turn around. Whereas I, having thought about this much more and having a much firmer grasp on foreign policy, especially with a country like China, this is what I would do. And you imagine a guy like George McGovern would be sitting there like a deer in the headlights saying, well, how did you know what I was going to say? And we found out later, of course. I don't know if that actually happened, if it broke down that way. Recall again that I was 6 years old. But simply knowing, breaking into the Democratic National Committee's campaign headquarters, they had so much intelligence, it just made that election a cakewalk for them. And it was the largest victory in U.S. electoral politics ever. I think McGovern won only 1 or 2 states. It was a washout. It was pathetic. But it was only later that we found out that, well, the Republican operatives had broken in to the Watergate Hotel. And basically, they knew what the Democrat, they knew their game plan. And if you know the opponent's game plan, then you can map out the perfect defense. Trump, I don't think he's allowed to have that point of view that the election was stolen. And all he was simply seeking to do was, he wasn't trying to, it wasn't insurrection. He wasn't trying to overthrow the government. He was simply trying to maintain his position as the head of the U.S. government, a constitutional republic. So before removing his name from the ballot, because I understand in the case of Maine that it was the Secretary of State for the state of Maine, a senior bureaucrat, an unelected official, who determined that Trump's name should be removed. At least in Colorado, as I understand it, it went to that state's Supreme Court, and I believe it was a 4-3 ruling in favor of invoking the 14th Amendment as justification for removing Trump's name from the ballot. That passes the smell test a little bit better than Maine, a lot better than Maine, where it's an unelected, appointed, ostensibly a bureaucrat, determining that Maine voters, those who are registered Republicans, that I get to choose who you get to vote for, absent an actual conviction. That is Donald Trump guilty of insurrection? No. As things stand right now, Donald Trump is not guilty of insurrection, because an indictment is not a conviction. What an indictment means is that, according to typically a grand jury, has determined that there is sufficient evidence, there's enough evidence here to have a trial. But it's not a conviction. What will happen is the two parties will argue, but there's no verdict issued. There's no guilty or innocence issued. If an indictment is quashed, that simply means that the grand jury has determined that there is not enough evidence to warrant going through a trial. I'll add at this point, I've gone on 18 minutes. The chat is on if you want to leave a remark. Now, does this mean that I like Donald Trump? No, I don't like the guy. I find I don't know the man at all. I've never, obviously, you'd be surprised to hear if I'd met him. Well, I haven't. The only knowledge what I know of Donald Trump is his public persona, and I don't like his public persona. He's arrogant, he's a narcissist on steroids and everything else. But just because I don't like the man doesn't mean that I'm going to applaud when I see something being done to him that I consider unjust. My own opinion doesn't matter. in 2016, and again, I'm a Canadian. I spent a number of years growing up in the United States. I went through 1, 2, 3, 4. I went through 5 years. I was in grades 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 in the United States. I was talking about this just today at work with friends who have come back from living down in Ohio, and they're back visiting. And the woman I know, it was her granddaughter who has gone down and now is back with her parents. And I said, have you learned it yet? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with justice and liberty for all. That's as best as I can remember it. And I do know that the words under God, I believe, have now been removed. Back when I was saying it in the 70s, one nation under God, indivisible, with justice and liberty for all was standard. So I have a reasonably good knowledge. I think my knowledge of American politics is better than a lot of Americans, to be perfectly candid. But in 2016, when it was Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump, still didn't like Donald Trump, couldn't stand Hillary Clinton. So when I engaged in conversation with respect to that election back in 2016, people said, would you vote for Trump? And I'd say, no, I'd either vote for Gary Johnson or Elizabeth Stein. I would have either voted for the Reform Party, which was Gary Johnson or Johnson, I forget which, or for Jill Stein, who was running for the Green Party, just rather than spoiling a ballot. That's how I would have voted in that election. Couldn't stand either one of them. By 2020, however, and given a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and now having seen Trump in action for 4 years, I would have voted for Trump. It's not to say I liked everything he did, but there was enough good that I liked. Number one, he pulled troops out of Syria. And I said, okay, that's a good thing. If Obama had pulled troops out of Syria, he would have been cheered. But Trump does it, and it's a bad thing. The other thing I liked is right off the bat, it came out during the 2016 campaign, and Trump made good on his promise, the Trans-Pacific trade deal that was going to link, or the United States was going to sign on to a trade partnership deal with the Pacific Rim, with China and Japan and such. And free trade, I've always viewed it as a race to the bottom. I think the tariffs and trade barriers and such, that these are key instruments of national governments to protect their best interests and the best interests of their citizens. And Canada, we had an election over free trade. In at first, it was just a free trade agreement between the United States and Canada. Then it was expanded to include Mexico and was referred to later as NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. But when the initial trade agreement was simply a free trade agreement between Canada and the US, and it was negotiated by Canada's then conservative government under Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And so it was the right wing promoting free trade, and the left wing, represented in Canada by John Turner's Liberal Party and Ed Broadbent's NDP, they campaigned vigorously against it. And in that election, Brian Mulroney's Conservatives were returned with an even larger majority. I would have to check, but I think it's the largest majority ever in Canadian electoral history. And so free trade went through. But this is, again, how this world has flipped upside down. It used to be that liberal left-wing parties were interested in protecting the rights of Canadian citizens and Canadian sovereignty, and in the United States, American interests and American sovereignty. Now it's flipped. Now it's the left wing that promotes corporate business interests over individual citizens. Because what happened in the wake of free trade is that some states, some US states, don't have a minimum wage law. All provinces in Canada do. And immediately jobs started going south. Jobs left Canada and they went south. I had a summer job. I was working at a printing plant, Monarch Marking. I don't mind saying the name because the company no longer exists. After free trade went through, within 6 months to a year, they closed up shop and moved to the United States. And there was all kinds of material going out at the workplace, encouraging people to vote. They didn't say vote conservative, just said vote for free trade. It'll be good for you. And they were all out of work. And then later, when that free trade agreement was expanded to include Mexico, I bet those jobs ended up in Mexico. I am not a fan of free trade. Fair trade, yes. Free trade, no. But getting back, so there's two good things that he did. The third thing he did, and when it happened, I didn't know that it was called the Abraham Accords. I just knew that what had happened is that the state of Israel, the modern nation state of Israel, had signed, they normalized relations and were entering into partnerships of a kind. Basically, for much of its history, Israel has been at odds with much of the Islamic world, and or if you like, the Arab world. Although I find that term a bit problematic because some countries deemed Arab are not Arab. I have trouble calling a country like Algeria or Morocco Arab. They're African, but that's more semantics, definitions, not semetics, semantics. Anyway, he signed the Abraham Accords, and that was between Israel and the United Arab Emirate states like Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, etc. I think also I think Morocco was included. And these are typically states that had been at odds with Israel. Now it was opening up the potential for business relationships and all manner of good things. And I thought, wow, this is significant. But the way the news treated it was like the mainstream, especially CNN, they treated it like it was nothing, like it was insignificant, like a dog could have negotiated this. And it was they were hell bent on not. It was because it was Trump. If Obama had negotiated that, if Obama had been involved in normalizing relations between Israel and Arab Islamic countries, oh yay, Obama! But Trump did it, so they pretended it didn't happen. And so there was enough good there that. Of course, there were plenty of things I didn't like about Trump. I didn't like him trying to take credit for the vaccines and public, basically talking about them like they're a great thing. Trump is a really enigmatic, he's an enigma. A lot of people will say, oh, Trump's a racist. Trump's a racist. And 2016, I would have believed that. 2016, I read an article that had been published, or it had been published in the New York Times. And what happened was the New York Times, Trump owned he was a real estate tycoon. And he owned a company that rented out high-end properties. And so what this investigative reporters from the New York Times did is they had individuals, black individuals, go with stellar credit ratings and great employment history and everything, and they had them go and apply for tenancy in a Trump property. And they were, according to the reporting, universally, told, oh, there's nothing available. Sorry, your application's been declined. Whereas then they would have a white couple go in with even an inferior profile to the black couple, and the white couple would be accepted. And so this was proof that Trump is racist. Having had time to reflect on it and think on it, it's a number of years ago, but the simple fact of the matter is, I don't think Trump's any more racist than Biden. Actually, I think Biden's more of a racist. The guy campaigned with, I think his name is Sam Nunn, who was a member of the KKK. Campaigns with a guy who's with the KKK. That's Joe Biden. I don't believe me, if Donald Trump had ever had a KKK member that he campaigned with, front page news. In terms of what happened in New York City with his company denying rentals to black individuals, I think it's a case where the New York real estate market is racist. It's the marketplace that is racist, not necessarily Donald Trump himself. I spent time growing up on Staten Island, New York. I was too young to remember it, but it entered the family lore. And my mother once told me that we lived on a street that was no black individuals lived on the street. Now, this is the 1960s. It's a long time ago. I was in diapers at the time. And but it entered into family lore, where my mom told me about a case where there was a dispute on the block that we lived on. We lived on a dead-end street, what Canadians call a cul-de-sac. So we lived on this dead-end street, and two neighbors were arguing with one another, and one of the individuals said, yeah, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell my house, and I'm going to sell it to blacks. And he didn't use the word black. He used the N word. And that would impact real estate value. And the reason it would impact real estate value is because the marketplace was, and I'm sad to say, is racist. Because fast forward now to early 2000s, probably would have been 2002, 2003, much later. And my eldest son went to school with a young kid. Well, they're both young, obviously. And this was actually preschool. And he was invited to a birthday party at Miles's house. And so I took my then little guy to Miles's party and hung out. And I ended up, and the family, the party, the family is black from the United States. Mom was from Akron, Ohio. Dad was from Indianapolis. And Dave and I got on like a ball of fire. We had similar interests, similar worldviews. We hit it off. And sometime later, the two of us went out to play some golf. And Dave and his wife, they had moved into a gorgeous house. I loved this house. It had 5 bathrooms. It was an old bungalow that they built onto, that not they, the previous owners had built onto, but now he had this house that was 5 bathrooms at 200 yards out the backyard. He had loads of property, and I just liked the house. And I was remarking on how much I love your house, because from the front, it was so unimposing, and you walk in and it just went on forever, but it wasn't overdone. It was very, and I said, I love your house. And he said, well, in his Indianapolis accent, he said, well, thanks a lot. when we were looking, I said to the real estate agent, this is him talking. He said, I didn't know if we could live here. And I looked at him and said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I know down in Indy, I can buy whatever house I want, but I know in some neighborhoods that if I move in, there's going to be a pickup truck with 5 angry white guys in the flatbed. And I'm like, it's still like that? And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, y'all don't have that here in Canada. And I looked at him and I said, well, maybe in South Oshawa. If you know my geography, you'll understand that. But anyway, Dave, and so even into the early 2000s, and it hasn't changed. I've talked to enough Americans. I was down 2017, 16, 17. I was down in Virginia Beach, and I engaged with people in conversation, both black and white. And yeah, it's as bad now as it was back in the 70s when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey. When I lived in New Jersey, I went to a school, Clary Coleman, in Glen Rock, New Jersey, grades 1 to 6. And in the entire school, there was one black family. That was it. You know, unfortunately, sadly, in the United States, there is a divide. We don't have it as bad as there's racism everywhere, but it's much more overt in the United States. Canada here, it's here, but it's below the surface. Most who hold those views will not speak it out loud. But anyway, bring it back. This 14th Amendment claim of insurrection against Donald Trump, proven in a court of law first. I suspect what will happen. I know that in Colorado, and there's the indications are the same for Maine, that they're going to be challenging this to the Supreme Courts of the United States, to the Supreme Court, not the state Supreme Court, not Colorado's Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the SCOTUS, as it is called. And I pray that cooler heads prevail and that American voters get to choose. There's no way when it comes to Joe Biden, I know this isn't a unique opinion, but the man is addled. The lights are on, but nobody's home. And I even question whether the lights are on. Like he's talk about a puppet dancing on a string. And that's one thing I think is a problem with Trump, is rightly or wrongly, whether he's right or whether he's wrong, he's his own man. He makes his own decisions. And the reason I don't like his personality is he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. Oh, nobody knows more about women's issues than me. Oh, military, I'll be great at military. I know more about the military than anyone. Okay, end of story. Nobody knows more about military than me. Trade, nobody knows more about trade. China, no one knows more about China. No one knows more about China than me, than Donald Trump. Yeah. Any topic, he knows more than anyone. But at the end of the day, if I'm an American, and I'm not, but if I am, Trump will put his own interests first, and overwhelmingly that Donald Trump interests overlap with the interests of Joe Average American. But I mean, to a large degree, you can view it as theater. It's a soap opera. We'll see what happens. There's so many other things going on in the world. The U.S. is having a huge problem with immigration, massive problem, a porous southern border. I've heard that in New York State now, the mayor there is trying to deny entry to any more immigrants, to any more of these migrants, because the city is just being overwhelmed if you look at my country, Canada, in the third quarter of this year, so that would be, I guess, from July, August, September, for the months of July, August, and September, the third quarter of 2023, third quarter just passed, Canada allowed in 430,000 immigrants. That's in 3 months. That's just over a 3-month period. That's it. And I've always been one, when the Syrian refugees were being brought in to Canada, I think 25, 35,000, I was like all over it. Yes. I mean, I have emotions too. We all saw that picture of that baby washed up on the shore of the Mediterranean in Europe, a child whose body had fallen off of one of these rickety rafts that were bringing people over from Syria, fleeing. I mean, and that just tears at your heartstrings. And yes, I wanted them brought here, but 430,000, that's pretty much the size of Newfoundland, one province. I mean, over the course of the year, 400,000, 4 times 4, that's 1.6 million. That's more than the population of a province like Manitoba or Saskatchewan. So every year we're going to add a new province to this country. And what that does to the economy, what it does to the culture, you don't have a country anymore. And that's the direction I think they want this world to go in. Globalism. National identity is being wiped out. And a guy like Donald Trump, who's America first, they don't want him anywhere near the White House. And the biggest reason is it's because they can't control him. At any rate, that's the end. I've gone on too long. Thank you for watching. No one left a comment in the live chat, but if you want to leave one down below in the comment field, most welcome. For the last month and a half, 2 months, I've been fixating almost entirely on the war going on between Hamas and Israel, everything going on in the Gaza Strip. Also, Yemen's declared war on Israel, and now there's talk of increased hostility along the northern border with Lebanon, where Hezbollah is based. And I tend to be like a dog on a bone, and I get one issue and I just hang on to that. I do pay attention to everything, most of the other things going on in the world, but Sojourner Didymus, someone who I really appreciate, who watches a lot of my videos and comments on a lot of them too, suggested, and he's right, the thought had occurred to me that, this narrow focus isn't very productive. And so I will be talking more on the war in Israel and between Hamas, but not exclusively. There are other things happening in the world. At any rate, when you next see me, the beard might be gone. And Christmas is over, time to lose the Santa Claus look. But anyway, God bless. Thank you for watching. Likes, share, subscriptions are always appreciated. And fill the comment field as much as you like, even if you think I'm wrong, especially if you think I'm wrong. Anyway, we'll see you again soon. Night all.